Hey guys, welcome to the Janus Project. A little bit of a book review today. Now, we're going over some Bible contradictions. We're going over systematic theology for non-Christians. And one of the principles of the Bible is that it is without error. All right? We're not saying that the Bible is the answer to absolutely every issue you could ever face in your life. Just all the spiritually applicable issues. It's not going to tell you how to change the tire on your car. It's not going to tell you how to build a flux capacitor. It has nothing to do with some of those issues. It is for life, for godliness, for spiritual edification. That's why the Bible's here. It basically gives you the facts behind what your purpose is. That's the point. It teaches us how to glorify God with our lives. Now, one of the common complaints that you're going to find with a lot of atheists, a lot of other religions, is they're going to say that the Bible is full of errors. Like I said in previous videos, we've been going through a series on this. The Bible is not full of errors. In fact, the vast majority of errors can be boiled down to you didn't understand the context. But what about those places where it seems like there's an error? It seems like a contradiction, or I couldn't fully understand what the Bible was getting at here. I want to go through a few books that I have found helpful, and I'll point out one or two that I did not find helpful. The first one I found helpful is this book right here. It's called Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes. Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes goes through kind of we have a Western mindset here in America and other places dominated by our way of thinking. And so we tend to look at things in groups. We tend to look at things, we tend to look at things individually. And what this is doing is it's pointing out that the Bible sometimes has more of a collective perspective. It also is going to point out some of the ways that ancient man dealt with time, the fact that certain languages are going to put more importance on certain topics, and the way you're going to know that is because they have a whole bunch of words for it. And so they point out the fact that one of them was a missionary to a Muslim country. They were like, this Muslim country, they don't have a whole lot of words for pork because they don't eat it. It's just whatever the word is, it's pork, whether it's being raised, transported, fried, whatever. It's all just pork. But he's like, but in America, we have sausage, we have bacon, we have, all these different types, we call them swine and pork and, the baby, we have all these different words because we have a little bit more importance when it comes to the word pork. Now, same with time. We're very, very much time-centered here in the West, but they pointed out a lot of other cultures, they're like, when it gets hot, and that's not a specific time. So when you get to the Bible is speaking in general terms about a lot of things because it didn't matter to that culture, but it matters to us. And so there's a lot of times where as you're looking at the Bible, you're not happy with its level of specificity because we are thinking in terms of a Western mindset. And so just keep that in mind. One other book that is kind of helpful, it's actually a book series, deals with a lot of Bible contradictions. And so it'll go through a lot of the various things that you're going to find in the Bible that you look at and go, that is a contradiction. These are actually nice. They're good. They go through a whole bunch of different topics, and they're going to take it and just expound on a bunch of different reasons why what you think that says isn't so. And again, it's going back to the culture. It's going back to the idea of that word meant this in that context. So that's not a contradiction at all. Another one here is we've got the Politically Incorrect Guide to the Bible. I know it seems sarcastic, but it actually is a really, really good book. And what this is going to do is it's going to delve into some of the history, going to delve into some of the various new Old Testament laws and how they apply and how they don't apply. And so that's going to be really fun. And so if you get a chance to read this one, it's a little more dumbed down. It's not irreverent or anything, but it's a little more on that side of like, come on, guys. And so it's fun. I enjoyed this book. They also have one on Islam and the Crusades, which is fun. If you want a more technical aspect, there's a few books you could go to, but the very name of this series on the Janus Project is Those So-Called Errors, and it's pulled from this book by Dr. Chester Koulis. And Dr. Koulis actually goes through, and primarily what he's dealing with in this book, again, Those So-Called Errors, is he's dealing with those numerical contradictions, the ones that don't necessarily impact specific doctrine other than the doctrine that is the Bible doesn't have errors in it, which is a pretty big one. And what he does is he doesn't resort to any of the, well, it's a scribal error. He actually goes in, tries to explain it in detail. And so what you'll have is you'll have this king, and it says this king started to reign at this age. But then this passage over here will say, no, this king started reigning at that age. And you're dealing with the same guy, and two passages give different dates. How do you deal with that? Seems like a pretty blatant error. And so what he does is he digs into each one of those, explaining again how in the cultural context, it makes sense that both could be correct. And you know, one will say this many armies, and this one says this many armies, and he'll draw out the specific wording, because that's the other thing to note. If I am watching a car crash and I say that there was one guy in the car who was driving, and someone else sees the car crash and actually points out there were two, again, those aren't contradictions. It could be I'm just pointing out the one guy that I happen to be talking about, not making any comment. Now, if I said there was only one guy in the car, okay, that's a contradiction. But if I said the one guy who was driving, blah, 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 and I don't mention anyone else, someone else comes from a different perspective and says, there were actually two people in the car. We're both correct, because I never said there was just one. I said the one guy who was driving, and you said there were two. Okay? So that's the type of situation where it'll talk about, 15,000 chariots and 100,000 soldiers. And then this other passage is like, well, he had 10,000 men who could ride on chariots. Okay, that's not a contradiction. It's just saying how many of those soldiers were actually chariot riders, and then how many chariots he had. Dig into the book. You'll see what I'm talking about. And so that's another way of explaining a lot of these contradictions, because there were cultural ways, there's careful wording, and the other aspect he gets into is there are times where you're going to measure the start of a dynasty as the age of that man. So if this guy started reigning at age 20, but then it also says he started reigning at age 40, it could be that his dynasty is 40 years old, he started reigning at 20. And so both of those are true, because one age is talking about the dynasty, the other age is talking about his physical age. And so if you want an explanation of a lot of those, specifically those ones in 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which again are more of a historical record, they're not really getting into a lot of how you should live. If you are confused on any of that, get this book right here, Those So-Called Errors, by Dr. Koulis, and he will dig into those more thoroughly than you'd ever want anyone to dig into them. So those are some helpful books. Now, Dr. Koulis comes from a King James Version perspective. Just if you know anything about that, not every writer that comes from a King James Version perspective is going to be helpful. I think of one, Gail Riplinger, who wrote this massive tome about the King James Version issue. It's garbage. This is a terrible book. Okay, misquotes all throughout, literally ascribing the wrong quotes to the wrong people, and so you can do a little more research on that. But I don't know where you fall on the whole versions issue. So if you are on the King James side and you believe that is the best version, Dr. Koulis is definitely someone you want to research. Gail Riplinger, not so much. All right, she's just not helpful. Okay, she's actually caused more issues in this situation than she's helped, and so I don't put any stock in this book. I keep it literally to tell people how certain books should not be used for research, because while I might agree with some of her conclusions, her research is so bad. So just a perspective here as we're looking at books. Just because you may or may not agree with the conclusion doesn't mean that their research actually backs up what you think. So those are some book recommendations. Again, I'll try to timestamp it so that you can go back to each one. But we've been spending a lot of time going over things like Those So-Called Errors, and I have mentioned some of those other books on the channel. So if you want to follow those up, they are very helpful if you are actually doing sincere research on the Bible and trying to understand some of the contradictions. I found another few YouTube channels and things like that are helpful as well. But if you want some books for your library, those would be ones I'd recommend. So guys, this has been the Janus Project, and thanks for tuning in.